What's up, guys? I'm Mike. This is Ajax. Back with another book review. I told you guys I'd go more in depth on the two books I just read, The Assyrian and The Blood Star by Nicholas Guild. This one is going to be more in depth, and I won't give too many spoilers, but there are going to be some. I really want to go into more detail about this story and why I think you guys should read these books. If you don't want any spoilers whatsoever, you just want like a bird's eye view, I made a short about these two books I encourage you to check out. No spoilers in that. But in this video, I really want to get into depth of what these books are about, why I think the story is so captivating, right? So we'll start with the first one, The Assyrian. Now, this book is probably my second favorite book I've ever read. My favorite book, and you guys have probably heard me mention this before, is The Aztec by Gary Jennings. What I look for in historical fiction is very well researched, meticulously researched, very descriptive details, someone that can bring you into the setting and the scenery and make you feel like you're there. And like an adventure, right? You're on the adventure with the main character. So in Aztec, Gary Jennings, he lived in Mexico for 10 years to write it. So descriptive. I mean, he brings you into the setting that he's describing and brings you along on this adventure with Mixley. Very similar vibes in The Assyrian. Takes place in ancient Assyria, and I love the maps that these historical fiction books usually come with. So he's traveling along this world, and he did meticulous research, you can tell, to make this book. And I really feel like I learned a lot about the Assyrian Empire just from reading this book. I didn't know much about it. It's an obscure empire. If you don't really dive into history, you probably don't know much about them. They were a brutal culture. Absolutely brutal. And they existed, I think it was like 7,000 BC up until like 500 BC, something like that. So very ancient. Going to war with like the ancient Babylon, ancient Egypt, right? This was that era. So you're really getting taken back in time, and I love the historical detail that goes into this book, and I love just being sucked into the setting. This was to go a little nerdy on you, the Assyrian Empire was a great empire. They had one of the greatest armies. Their engineering was fantastic. It was almost like the Rome before Rome. In their cities, like Nineveh, after they were abandoned, people would stumble upon them in the desert, right? I'm referring to Xenophon, the Greek general at this point. Stumbled upon the ancient city of Nineveh in the desert and wondered who could have built something like this, because it was more grand than anything else he had experienced in this time. And he's coming back from the great empire of Persia, and he's from ancient Greece. They were more technologically advanced, the Assyrians, than even his time period was. I can only imagine like that happening today. You stumble upon a city in 2026 and you find a city that's more advanced than the technology we have today. Just amazing how this empire of Assyria was incredible. So Nicholas Guild really takes you to this empire, and he did a lot of research to take you there. And so to give you a little synopsis of what this story is about, it's about a boy, it starts in the book, named Tiglath-Ashur. He's the son of King Sennacherib, who was a historical figure, and he's the brother of Esarhaddon, who was also a historical figure. And they're half-brothers, right? Same father, different mothers. And they grow up together. And from the time they're young boys, they're best friends. And they're not the heir to the throne. That's another brother of theirs. So they grow up in the army. They're expected to serve. And so they grow up in the army barracks and are trained how to fight. And each of them gets better with a different weapon. Esarhaddon's really good with the sword, and he's really good at wrestling. Tiglath, who's half Greek, he's a little lankier. He's better with a javelin. He's better at throwing things. He's better, on a chariot. And it's just amazing. You watch these two boys go to war together, and their experiences in the capital of Nineveh together, getting drunk and going out on the town together, talking about each other's dreams and their life goals. And eventually, the brother that's supposed to become king is killed. He's assassinated by the Babylonians. And so Assyria ends up going to war with Babylon. And I think much of this is historically accurate. Many of the wars that happen in both these books are historically accurate. Assyria demolished the ancient city of Babylon. And they also invaded Egypt and took over Egypt for a time. And that happens in actually the second book. But neither of them is sure who's going to be king after their other brother dies. And so they're growing up not sure. And it's kind of up to the God's will. They have ancient priests that read omens and everything that are going to determine this. And Esarhaddon's mother, she is kind of the antagonist of this whole book. And she's kind of orchestrating things behind the scenes in a lot of ways. So they're best friends. They don't know who's going to become king. Esarhaddon doesn't even want to become king. He just wants to be a general. Many people think Tiglath should be king. And it's always, as the story goes on, he becomes famous through his own acts. He battles 3 lions at one point. He leads an army in battle several times. It becomes very well known in the Assyrian Empire. People want him to be king. The people want him to be king. He feels as if it's the God's will, Ashur's will, to become king. And then Esarhaddon is named king. And another aspect of the story is Tiglath is in love with a woman named Esarhamat. Or Esharhamat. She is Tiglath's love since they were kids. And he's in love with her and she's in love with him. But she's also destined to be the king's wife. So now that Esarhaddon is named king, he gets to marry her. And Tiglath is devastated. And there's nothing he can do about it. He's very much into his own culture. He's not going to rebel against it. And there begins to grow a tension between Tiglath and his brother Esarhaddon. And the story goes on, and eventually King Sennacherib is assassinated. And Esarhaddon becomes king. And there's tension building up, right? Before Esarhaddon becomes king, there's tension between Tiglath and him now. And eventually they're best friends. Their friendship starts to fall apart. And their brotherly love almost starts to disintegrate. And it's tragic. You're reading about this. At one point, Esarhaddon tries to kill Tiglath. But Tiglath beats him in a fight and chooses to spare his life. And this tension is building, and before, while King Sennacherib is still alive, before Esarhaddon can become king, the only thing keeping them together and keeping both of them alive is King Sennacherib. He wants them to get along because they're brothers. King Sennacherib is assassinated. Esarhaddon is elevated to king. And this spells doomsday for Tiglath. He's loved by the people, and he's now kind of a rival for power. The people wanted Tiglath to become king. Many people don't like Esarhaddon. And as it gets to this point in the story, a civil war breaks out after Sennacherib is assassinated. And Tiglath has to choose. Is he going to support the rebellion and fight against his brother, or take the side of his brother? And he's in charge of a very large army. He can make or break this rebellion. He chooses to stay with his own culture and obey the king, who is now his brother and kind of his mortal enemy at this point. And he chooses to side with Esarhaddon. He uses his army to defend Esarhaddon's right to the throne. So he does this. They win the battle. Esarhaddon has him locked up and thrown in a cage, and you don't know what's going to happen to him. He's in the cage for days, and he thinks he's a dead man. And eventually he's let out, and he has a confrontation with Esarhaddon, and he doesn't know what's going to happen. And Esarhaddon banishes him from the whole land of Assyria, which is a very vast empire, huge. Banishes him from Assyria to never return. And so, like I said, I love the maps that come with these books. Ancient Assyria is right, let me get it for you guys. It's right along here. It starts here. The old capital of Ashur, the new capital is Nineveh. But much of this is, basically all of this is the Assyrian Empire. He has to flee. And he has to flee and get out of the entire territory, right? And he has a slave named Kephalos, who's also a Greek, who, I kind of skipped over this, but he's also one of his best friends. His slave is very wise and knows how to get money and he has a lot of connections with people around the globe, basically. So Tiglath and Kephalos, they have to make a break for it. And the end of this book, the first book, is him being banished. And so he's banished from the empire and he has to make a break. And that's where the second book comes in, the Blood Star. And I love the name of this book. He has Tiglath has a star on his palm. It's red like blood, and it's to signify his grandfather was Sargon, who was also a historical figure, Sennacherib's father. Sargon was considered one of the greatest kings of Assyria, and the night he died, there was a star the color of blood. And so when Tiglath is born, he's born with the star on his palm. And that's considered like an omen to the gods, right? Like another reason like that he should become king. It's kind of like his destiny. But his destiny is taken from him. And again, Esarhaddon's mother has something to do with all this, right? I won't get into too much of that. Kind of want to save a little bit, not give all the spoilers away, but she has some parts to play in this whole story. The beginning of this book is the beginning of his banishment, right? He's still in ancient Assyria, and he has to leave. So now it's a much wider map we're seeing here. Nineveh's over here, and he has to travel past Greece. He ends up in Sicily at some point, right? And he spends a lot of time in Egypt. He spends years in Egypt, and I love these. That is my kind of historical fiction, traveling the world, going all over the place. Like, that's what Aztec drew to me, right? I love the traveling along, they call it the One World, but it's basically like Mexico, that whole area. All the different mini cultures contained therein. And the same thing with The Journeyer by Gary Jennings, which is about Marco Polo and his adventures through the whole world, right? Going from Italy to Asia and under Kublai Khan and the Mongol Empire. So he has to travel and he has to escape. So he escapes through this river and he ends up in the Bitter River, right? And he has to make his way all the way around. And there's a lot that happens in this book. I'd say the beginning of this book is probably slower paced. I found that the Assyrian was captivating from start to finish. There's a lot of warfare that happens. Tiglath fights in a lot of battles. This is more, a little bit slower pace. It's more traveling. It's less climatic. There's not as much battles in the beginning. So he's traveling with Kephalos. He ends up in Egypt and staying there for a few years. And he falls in love with an Egyptian who's actually a married woman. A lot of drama in Egypt. And I won't give all the details away, but he eventually has to flee Egypt as well. And he has assassins that are coming after him. And he doesn't know who sent them, but he's assuming it's Esarhaddon trying to get rid of him because he's still a rival to the throne. Even though he's fleeing the land, he believes that his brother is still trying to get rid of him. So he's fleeing from the empire. Assassins are coming after him. He has to get out of Egypt. And eventually he has to go past Greece and he ends up in Sicily. Now, the Roman Empire doesn't exist at this point. And in Sicily there is Greek settlements, right? That's where Syracuse is. So he ends up linking up with Greeks and he becomes a farmer there. And he gets involved in a war there against the Sicilians. There's a Sicilian man who's, I think he's the king of a certain part of Sicily. And he has to go to war with him and he rebels against him. And so there are some mini battles. It's a much like smaller world he's now a part of. It's not this grand empire of Assyria. He's getting together a band of farmers and he has to train them like warriors, but he knows what he's doing. He's been a very high-ranking officer in the Assyrian army, and the Assyrian army was unbelievable in this period of time, right? In real life, they were almost unmatched in the field, which is why the Assyrian Empire became what it was. They conquered everybody for a couple hundred years before their eventual downfall. So he ends up in Sicily and he meets another woman. It's actually his slave for a bit, and she becomes his wife. And then he's recalled. He's recalled back to Assyria by his brother. His brother commands him to come back. And everyone thinks he's a fool for even considering it. He's going to be killed the second he goes back. He has a duty, he feels like, to obey his king. Despite the animosity he has towards his brother, he kind of hates his brother for obvious reasons at this point. He feels like he needs to go back. And throughout both these books, he's clearly marked by the god Ashur. That's the god that the Assyrians worshipped. He feels as, and he has some connection with this god, and he talks to him, and he has interactions with this old man that's like a representation of the god, and gives him like words of wisdom and like foreshadowing throughout both books, foreshadowing what's going to happen. And so he believes it's the God's will, and he's going to just follow it. So he goes back to Assyria, and his brother tries to reconcile with him. And so it's such a, I love the scenes that they put into this book of just them reconciling, going from these kids, they were best friends in the original book, the Assyrian, to basically enemies, and now they're trying to reconcile. It's an awesome story, and I love just the progression of it and the falling out, and now they're trying to reconcile. And Tiglath is pissed, and he initially still hates his brother, even though his brother really wants to reconcile with them. And it turns out that it wasn't his brother sending the assassins; it was Esarhaddon's mother. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and Esarhaddon isn't necessarily the one in control of everything. His mom has always been overbearing and a very scary woman, and she still is to this day. And Esarhaddon's always worried that like his mother's gonna, have him poisoned or something. So he recalls Tiglath because Tiglath is the only one that can stand up to his mother. So he comes back. Esarhaddon goes to war again. He goes to war with the Egyptians, and he needs Tiglath again. So Tiglath helps them lead into battle. They conquer Egypt. They come back, and Esarhaddon starts to act a little weird, and he's not sure what's happening. And Esarhaddon ends up getting poisoned, and he ends up dying. And it ends up being, I told you that Esarhamat, sorry if I'm all over the place, right? These are two books that contain a lot of info, and I'm trying to recall it all for you guys right now. But Esarhamat, which was Tiglath's lover when they were kids, right, ends up being Esarhaddon's wife. Tiglath goes back to visit Nineveh at some point, and he gets her pregnant with his son. And Esarhaddon knows this. And his son is named Ashurbanipal, which is actually another historical figure, considered the last great king of Assyria. So Esarhaddon dies, and Ashurbanipal becomes king. And Ashurbanipal is a smart boy, and he knows that Tiglath is still a point where people could rally and possibly be a rival or a challenge to his throne. So Tiglath is his uncle. It's really his father, but he doesn't know that. And he tells him that he needs him to go, and he needs him to leave. And Tiglath is fine with that. He wants to go back to the farming life he had in Sicily with his wife. And his wife now has a baby. He wants to leave. And so they go back to Sicily. And he says he hears stories about Assyria, and then the stories slowly stop coming. And what happened in real life is the Assyrian Empire fell apart very, very quickly, within like a decade or two. And he's having these visions, Tiglath is. The god is telling him all these visions that are of what's gonna happen to Assyria, that there will be owls in the temples of Nineveh, and there will be foxes running in the streets, meaning the city is going to be abandoned, which is what happens in real life. Eventually, all the different empires and the different city-states that Assyria conquered rise up, and they kind of form a coalition. And the Medes also were a big part of this. The Medes are kind of nomadic right now, and they're not really a big force. Eventually, they become... the Persians are kind of like a subset of the Medes, or like cousins of the Medes, right? And that's the Persian Empire is the people that end up conquering the rest of this land. They become unbelievably great under the leadership of Cyrus the Great, if you ever heard of him. Cyrus the Great, the first and considered the greatest king, besides maybe Darius, of the Persian Empire. Them, Babylon, ancient Egypt, they all had enough with Assyria. And Assyria was brutal in the way that they tortured people. I mean, they would take kings and capture them after they had taken their city, kill their families in front of them and then put out their eyes. So that's like the last thing they saw. I'm sorry if that's graphic, but that's the kind of stuff that are in these novels. They'll skin people alive and then hang their skin on the side of a wall, and the person's still kind of alive and flailing at that point. Assyria was brutal, and that's why the Persians ended up being so lenient. They decided to take the opposite approach of Assyria. So to wrap this up, he's in Sicily and he's kind of just hearing stories about what happened and everything. And Tiglath lives to be a very old man, and he writes that he's very old age, and he's kind of just recounting his experiences. He outlives his wife. He outlives Ashurbanipal, which was his son. He watches his son grow and become king, and then he dies. And this whole time he's in Sicily, living his own simple farmer life. But the whole arc of the story is just so beautiful. Both these books combined were an incredible read, like stuff that you don't want to put down. Can't stop turning the pages kind of thing. And I mean, these are two decently sized books. They are well worth the effort. I would say that the Assyrian, to me, is my favorite of the two. A lot of the people, when I read reviews on these books, people say the Bloodstar is their favorite. So to each their own, but that just goes to show you they're both really good books. I would say the Assyrian is my favorite. It's Aztec-esque. I very much enjoyed this book. The Bloodstar too. It's just a different flavor. But the end of the book, I mean, things really heat up. And the end of the book is much similar to how the Assyrian was. But I highly recommend both these books. I highly recommend you checking out. I want to read more on Nicholas Guild. To me, this author was incredibly descriptive. I mean, really brings you into the empire and the scenery that he's describing in Egypt, in Sicily, in ancient Assyria, obviously. Two incredible books. I can't recommend them enough. So if you're into historical fiction and you like the journeying style like I do, like you're on a journey with the main character, a la Aztec or